My name is Redmon Rock, and I was a radio operator in headquarters battery of the 384th Field Artillery Battalion, which was attached to the 103rd Infantry Division, and we were in Europe. And my job as a radio operator was they would put me on a hill, and I had contact with a Piper Cub then flying over the enemy lines, and I had a telephone line from my, I had a 3/4-ton weapons carrier with the radio, and they would run a telephone line from my truck to Fire Direction Center. Well, Fire Direction Center was in a sheltered area, but since they were in a sheltered area, they couldn't use a radio down there because the transmission and reception was no good. So they had me up on the hill, and then the Cub would call me with fire missions, and then I would ring Fire Direction, say fire mission, and then I would operate my radio so that the Cub could talk directly to the Fire Direction guys, and the Fire Direction could talk directly to the Cub. And that was principally my job. And one afternoon, no, it was a morning, Fire Direction called me and said, get hold of the Cub. So I went out on the air and called for the Cub, and no answer. And I called Fire Direction back, said he doesn't respond. So they said, keep trying. So after about a half an hour, I called back. He said, he's still not responding. So they said, well, never mind. So they called me later on in the day and said, forget it. But then I found out that he had been observing fire for an infantry cannon company, and one of their rounds had hit the plane in midair, and that was the end of the Cub and the two people in it. But it was, as you know, in the artillery, you don't have that M1 rifle, and you're not out there with the enemy. And we were back far enough, so, but we had to contend with 88 shells from the German guns and mortars, things like that, and mines, and but it was the guy with the rifle that did the dirty work. So it was an interesting experience. I don't know if I'd say good, but it was interesting. Yeah, right.
What I remember, my name is Marilyn Cheret, and I was about 6 years old when I remember that we were on rationing stamps. We had a rationing book of stamps. And I remember asking my mother to buy certain things, and food, for instance. And she said no, because we've already spent those stamps. And I said, well, why can't we take the car and go somewhere? And she said, because we don't have gas stamps. Everything depended on stamps in those days. I remember that very clearly. I also remember then when I was just slightly older than that, we moved up here. We were originally from the southern part of Missouri, the farmland, which was good because we raised a lot of food. But then we came up here, and my mother worked in the war plants. My father went to war, and she worked in making amphibians. And she was very proud of that job because the majority of people were women, and the women did very well. They handled the plant, and they were successful. And she really felt that she was a very important part of that. And her name was Rose, so of course it was Rosie the Riveter. And those are my main remembrances of the war, and what part I was just like on the outskirts of it, watching.
My name is Wallace Behringer. I'm 80 years old now. I went in the Army when I was 18 in May of 1944. I went to Texas and did infantry basic training, and Congress wouldn't let 18-year-olds go overseas as replacements, so they took all the 18-year-olds and put them into a division and sent the division overseas. Now you're in an organized unit. And I went overseas with the 63rd Infantry Division, and we landed in Marseille, and we went up north into France. This was just about the middle of December, just before the Belgians started. And we got up there, and General Patton up north had just run out of men. So they scavenged from the new divisions. They just took, what they did is they took the new guys, and I was a new guy, and they sent them up north to the Bulge. And that's where I spent my combat career, and I was now in the 90th Infantry Division, which had landed on D-Day, and I wasn't there, thank God. I stayed in them until late February sometime. We fought in, our first job was we were attacking the south side of the Bulge. And then after we straightened that out, then we turned east and we're going into Germany. And you never knew the country you were in because you couldn't read the signs. So finally we did get to Germany. I knew I was in Germany because I spent, the last night I was there, I spent it in one of the huge concrete bunkers, the Siegfried Line they called it. And spent the night there, and I woke up the next morning and it felt like I was being stabbed in the back. What it turned out to be was pneumonia. And so my combat career was over. It was exciting. A platoon, I was in what they call the weapons platoon, machine guns and mortars. There's about 40 men. That last day, there was 11 of us. That's all there was, and which was typical of war. They were running out of people. And they sent me to a hospital and dosed me up with penicillin, which was the wonder drug of the century. I'm now allergic to it. If I take it now, I'd probably die from it. 30 shots of it. They give it to you every 4 hours to you, and then they send you back. Well, on the way back, I got back to the infantry, and then they come along and they said, we need 50 people for detached duty. And it wasn't something you volunteered for. They just call off 50 names. And if somebody doesn't answer, they keep calling until they get 50. And I was the 50th name. And they sent us off on trucks. And I ended up in the military police, which was like going on vacation. You just directed traffic, you guarded prisoners, all kinds of jobs. You never knew what you were going to do next. But you did eat better and sleep better because it was sort of an organized unit. The infantry was a ragtag bunch of people. You're constantly changing in the infantry because the new ones come in and the old and sick or wounded go out, you know. We had some of them that had been there a long time, though. We had a couple of them that actually landed on D-Day. And he was a great guy, Sergeant Bybee. And when he said do something, you did it. That's the way it was. But he was a nice man. And the first thing he did after we got there, new people, he said, all right, you new guys, come on with me. And he took us out in the woods. And he says, I'm going to shoot at that tree over there. And see it? And he'd shoot at it. Now you shoot at it. He wanted people around him that could shoot. That's why he'd lasted since D-Day. So, and we had other oddballs too, but that's typical of an army, and that people were not brought up to be in the army like Germans were. And so we finished off the war, and I don't know what country I was in when the war ended. It was, you can't read the signs, so you don't know where you're at. But I would think I was over in Germany toward Czechoslovakia, but I don't know for sure. And then I stayed in the AMPs for a while. Then they sent us back to the infantry because they thought we were going to go to Japan. And then that fell apart. So I didn't have enough time in to go home. The old guys went, they deserved it. And they went home first, and actually they developed a point system. Each month counted for so much, each combat decoration. And I spent, another year maybe, a little less than a year, I don't remember exactly. And I came home in 46, the middle of 46 as I remember. But it was exciting. One of the good points was they developed a pass system. You can go to Paris, you can go to London, and the prize ticket was to go to Switzerland. So I put my name in for Switzerland, and I was about ready to go home, and my name hadn't come up. So I talked to a couple of people, and I mean, I did get to go to Switzerland. We went to St. Moritz, of all places. Of course, I didn't ski. And looking at those mountains, I'm glad I didn't, because I'm telling you, they're straight down. There's nothing like that in Michigan. That was an exciting time. And it was just like, everything was nice and bright and clean, the people, and almost all the Swiss people speak English because it's a big tourist language. So it was an exciting time. The part in France and Germany, I don't want to go again, but I'd go back to Switzerland. But I got out, came home, went to college, got married. There she sits over there. 6 little kiddies. She was a war widow, by the way. Her husband died, came home from the war and died, and she had 2 little kiddies, and I knew her, but see, she's older than I. Yeah, 15-year-old boys don't date 18-year-old girls, you know how that is. But we did get together, and we did get married. We had an anniversary last week, 56 years.
My name is Marion Barringer, and I graduated from Cooley High School, and I was going to nursing school, wanted to. And my mother said then I'd have to work because she was a single parent. So I was going at the time to a young man named George David Hedquist, and he played for the Boston Red Sox as a pitcher. And the draft came along, he was drafted, and came home. And as I say, I wanted to go to nurse school. My mother said I have to work. Well, David said, no, I want to marry her because I'm going to the South Pacific. So he wrote a letter to my mother, and she said, okay. So I ended up as a secretary at Civil Corporation, which I disliked very much. But I worked through the war, you know. Anyway, make long story short, David went to the South Pacific. We got married. We were together 10 days. He went to the South Pacific for 3 years. And while there in the South Pacific, first of all, he was trained in the 112th Horse Cavalry in Fort Riley, Kansas, because they picked mostly athletic people that could ride horses and so forth. And they took the horses to Japan. But on the way, most of them died because they thought the Japanese would invade New Caledonia, which was mountainous region, and so they called him dismounted infantry after that. Well, he was gone, as I say, 3 years, and I worked, and he was injured. He had a head wound to the right side of his head, but they kept him there for 3 years after being hospitalized. Plus, this isn't happy. The jungle ate his bones from his legs, because when he came home, I had to soak those trousers in his arms. And so they operated on him, and I had him, he lived long enough for me to have my first child, Bob, who was 2, and his daughter was 5 months when he died. And he was a great soldier, a great man, and a wonderful pitcher. And I lost him. But Wally and I, the next husband, we went to the same church. And so did my first husband. And I met him on the bowling team. And I didn't date, of course, and so forth, because I was still very angry with the world. As I learned after that, you can't go through life like that. And I was determined. I had a house. I was going to be determined to raise those babies, and no help from anybody, but I soon learned differently. And so I lucked out, married Wally, and he was, one half of the church thought he was crazy for marrying me, and the other half of the church thought I was crazy for marrying a younger man, 3 years younger. And he ended up going to finishing his degree after he came home from Europe. And we married, and here I am with a wonderful man, and I lucked out with having two. When I came to be a war widow, the government wasn't too kind to war widows. And I hate to say this, but seeing you're asking me, I'm going to tell you. I rode the Woodward streetcar with 2 babies, bottles and diapers, down to where the VA hospital is at this time. There was one office, and you sat for hours waiting to have someone hear you about being compensated for this, because I had 2 babies to raise. And then I ride that streetcar all the way back home, and it was a long time before they came forth, the government. And a lot of war widows suffered because of that. Eventually, Senator Vandenberg at the time was our senator. And if it hadn't been for him, I don't think I ever would have had a compensation. So my children did luck out after a while. In fact, one of them were able to go to college. We survived. And during the war, we all survived, you know. I rode streetcars and buses. I didn't have a car, of course. And we knew the kids were overseas fighting the war. We had to fight our own war right here and be satisfied with the way life was.
Arnold J Weingart. I was acting corporal. Marines don't give very good promotions. They're very stingy of promotion. I left Detroit, Michigan, when I went down to the federal building, and I ended up at the end of the war in China. So I went right across the Pacific. Major campaigns was Guam and Okinawa. And we had those amphibious ducks. I don't know if you've ever seen one of the amphibious ducks. Well, they go on land and see both. You go down into the beach, and when you hit the water, you put it in a prop, and it goes right out to the ship. And then they'll load the cargo net right down on your dock area, the cargo area, and you would go into shore. When you get into the shore, you throw out the prop and throw in the pump. They pump up the tires, the balloon tires, big balloon tires. Then you go right to the area and you drop your load and go back and get some more. And we took wounded out to the hospital ship, and a lot of times we would be able to stop one guy, get off the dock and go get a good square meal in those merchant ships. They really accommodated us. And on Guam, I really saw death right next to me. I looked down, and there was a guy with his head half blown off. And that was, oh boy, that was enough. I was ready to go home. And then we went to Okinawa, where they had the Japanese Zeros coming in on us. And we were living in one of the shacks, one of those little stone buildings that all the civilians all left. And that was the worst time, when I saw the civilians throwing their children down on the rocks, and the mother and father would jump after them because they said we'd eat them. They had them brainwashed. And that was really the time I really broke down. But other than that, I've seen death very, very frequently. And I was out in the yard. We had farmer's yard. There was a sow with 12 little piglets. I already wrote that in his book. And we had a boy from South Dakota, a farm boy. He knew how to slaughter animals. So we had fresh pork from the day we got there to the day we left. No more little pickets left. So old Mummy was all by herself. But it was an experience that I wouldn't want to ever see anybody go through what I went through. And I was lucky 3 times. I think I would have been a guy right alongside me got hit by a sniper. And, you know, it's either him or me. And they got him. And one other time I was on a merchant ship, and they have those guide wires that hold the loads back and forth. And the guide wire came loose and hit me in the back of my helmet. And I went right across the deck. And I think I had a real good headache for a while. But I would go to the med because it's come with a headache. I mean, there's guys wounded and stuff, you know. So I just got over it. So that's about it.
My name is Gene Peters, and I was in the combat infantry in the South Pacific. Took 37 days to get to New Guinea, where we headed for, and that was a nice cruise. We started out at Goodenough Island. That's just south of New Guinea. Got our taste of combat there, and I was the first gunner on 81 millimeter mortar, and we saw a lot of action. But from there we moved up into New Guinea, made about 4 stops along the way in New Guinea, and then moved up in the Dutch East Indies. And we made a beachhead on Morotai Island. Now this beachhead, we were combat broke in already, you know, we know what to do. But I made the beachhead with my backpack full of beer. We got a hold of a couple cases of beer from some sailors on the ship, and we're making a beachhead now. My guys got all my equipment I need. We make the landing and I salvaged the beer. And that was great. So anyhow, we stayed there for about 6 months, got established an airstrip, and that was where the 5th Air Force, I think it was, went over to started the Philippine invasions. And I never saw so many goddamn ships in my life as when we were coming in there. The whole Navy was with us. Our next move was the landing in Mindanao, which is in the Philippines. And like I said, total overall, I spent 2 years in the Pacific, in and out of combat. And one other thing, on my 21st birthday in the Philippines, we were in a goddamn hole. We used to dig nut foxholes, emplacement holes, you know. And I had been accumulating mail from home. And my mother said, I wrote constantly, always end it with please send, something, anything, whatever it is, because they couldn't send anything over to you unless they had this request, which makes some sense. But anyhow, she was taking a loaf of rye bread, hard crust rye bread, slicing it in half, taking half of it out and putting whiskey in there for me. 21st birthday, I'm breaking open this whiskey and a few other canned things there in a foxhole. That's a hell of a place to spend a birthday, isn't it? Anyhow, I made it through, cut up a little bit, but that's about it.